January 10th, 1922 in Eufaula, Alabama. A 25-year-old black man named Willie Jenkins became the victim of not one, but two lynchings. The first took his life. The second, a heritage lynching, continues to this day, attempting to erase his humanity and the true circumstances of his death. Heritage lynching, a term coined by scholar Eliza Jane Franklin in 2024, describes the act of controlling or terrorizing a community's or individual's heritage, including built landscapes, physical artifacts, cultural forms, intangible culture, and biological traits. This form of violence works to erase stories of racialized violence, land struggles, and political struggles. It operates through seemingly neutral mechanisms: media, preservation funding, architectural celebration, tourist narratives, perpetuating historical violence through institutional means. The newspapers of 1922 tell multiple versions of Willie J. Jenkins' final days. Some frame his death as an escape attempt. Others call it a lynching. These competing narratives reveal how media shapes and distorts our understanding of history, American history. Each headline, each chosen word, represents an act of dismembering the past with altered memories, determining which stories survive and which fade away. The roots of this story begin in Lugo, a small place 6 or 7 miles west of Eufaula on Highway 82. Willie Jenkins, a World War I veteran who had survived the trenches of France without a scratch, had returned home to Alabama. He had escaped German bombing and all the German shootings, but he could not escape what awaited him in Barber County. Jenkins was working for George Williams of the McLeod gang. His wife lived on Williams' property, and when Jenkins tried to see her and his 5-month-old baby, Willie Lee, trouble began. Williams didn't want him there and had the gang threaten him. Jenkins was forced to hide in the woods for several days, hunted by men: Almarine Johnson, George G.W. Williams, and Dozier McLeod, who would eventually become his killers. Seeking refuge, Jenkins made his way to the home of BP Baby Jordan, but the gang was close behind. After leaving Jordan's, Jenkins reached Lugo and managed to board a train headed for Georgetown, Georgia. The gang, led by Dozier McLeod, pursued him on horseback, bringing an extra horse for their captured prey. At the train station, they spread a false narrative, telling railroad employees that Jenkins had fled town, owing them money. Then came an act of calculated terror. They dragged him from the train, placed a noose around his neck, and forced him to walk in front of their horses back toward Eufaula. The covered bridge across the Chattahoochee River was Willie Jenkins' last path to Eufaula. This bridge, like so many historic structures, holds multiple histories. For some, it represents antebellum engineering and commerce. For others, it marks a site of terror, where a man was marched to his death with a noose around his neck. As they rode down Broad Street with their captive, a witness called out, "Where y'all taking that man?" GWS response that Jenkins needed to settle a debt masked their true intentions. This public spectacle of violence, carried out in broad daylight, speaks to the impunity with which racial terror operated. In Eufaula stands the Wellborn House, the second oldest home in the city. Built in 1837 by enslaved laborers on land seized from the Creek Confederacy, this Greek Revival mansion represents layers of historical violence and displacement. Dr. Thomas Levi Wellborn, who was wounded fighting against the Creeks in 1836, commissioned this house, a monument to conquest built by forced black labor. Today, the 5-bay structure with its 4-columned Doric portico stands preserved on the National Register of Historic Places, moved from its original location to prominent Broad Street. Its columns, crafted from plastered brick by enslaved hands, rise as testament to whose history we choose to preserve and whose we allow to fade. The final moments of Willie Jenkins' life reveal calculated cruelty. At baby Jordan's store, when he asked for water, Williams took a Coca-Cola bottle, urinated in it, and forced Jenkins to drink. They cut his leg to prevent escape, but despite this wound, Jenkins made a desperate run for freedom when the gang was distracted threatening baby Jordan. He was tracked by his own blood to Jordan's spring, where the gang shot him multiple times before executing him with a shot to the back of the head. Jenkins left behind a daughter, Willie Lee, who would marry Eliza Franklin and have 12 children. In a bitter twist of historical irony, her husband was the son of Dozier McLeod, one of the men responsible for her father's death. The children grew up carrying the weight of this complex legacy, descendants of both victim and perpetrator. Today, Eufaula celebrates its antebellum architecture and engineering feats like the covered bridge, but these preserved structures tell selective stories. The bridge that carried cotton and commerce also carried Willie Jenkins to his death. This is how heritage lynching operates, preserving certain narratives while submerging others beneath the river's flow. The day after the killing, the black community gathered at baby Jordan's house. Jenkins was wearing new tan shoes that day, a final dignity the gang tried to strip away when they returned to take them. They brought the shoes to Reverend Howard Grant, who refused their cruel trophy, telling them he knew they had killed Jenkins. Walker Dawson went down into the well, where they had dumped Jenkins' body, and brought him up for proper burial at Old Antioch Cemetery. But stories of heritage lynching don't always end in erasure. In an extraordinary turn of history, the Wellborn house has been purchased by Willie Jenkins' great-granddaughter. This act of reclamation transforms a symbol of the Old South into a space for truth-telling. While Eufaula's celebrated house museums, the Shorter Mansion and state-owned Fendall Hall, continue to romanticize antebellum narratives, the Wellborn house will now serve a different purpose. Where other historic homes perpetuate selective memory, this space will acknowledge the full spectrum of Black and Indigenous local histories. The same halls that once echoed with the footsteps of enslaved laborers will now resound with the voices of their descendants. The same rooms that witnessed generations of silence will now hold space for untold stories. This is more than preservation. It's resurrection. The waters of the Chattahoochee flow past Eufaula today, as they did in 1922. They carry the memory of Willie Jenkins' final journey, of a man who survived war in France, only to die at the hands of his neighbors, of a daughter who would marry into the family of one of her father's killers, of a community that chose which stories to remember and which to submerge. But through the work of his great-granddaughter at the Wellborn house, these waters now carry something else, the possibility of truth, of recognition, of reclaiming the histories that heritage lynching tried to wash away. Willie Jenkins' physical lynching ended his life on January 10, 1922. His heritage lynching has persisted through decades of selective preservation and historical erasure. But today, through the actions of his granddaughter, Cynthia Franklin, great-granddaughter, Eliza Jane Franklin, and Brian Stevenson's EJI Memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, his legacy helps transform a symbol of oppression into a beacon of truth and reconciliation. This is how we fight heritage lynching, not just by remembering, but by remembering the dismembered parts of our history